Well, Jim, it appears we have Scott Bowden, the man behind the Kentucky Fried Wrestling podcast, on the line right now.
Well, you've already introduced him then, goddammit. I will do it again. Ladies and gentlemen, he's the Beaver Cleaver of professional wrestling. Scott Bowden. How are you, Scott?
I'm more like the Eddie Haskell, really. But that's
what the first time we met was when I came back over with Stan Lane from Charlotte, and they brought Steve Kern up, and we did the deal with the Fabs turning on Lawler for the bounty and et cetera, et cetera. And you were a young, chipper, moon-faced referee. And while we were abusing the job guys, I mentioned to I guess it was Dave at the desk at that point. I said, who's this referee, Beaver Cleaver? He looks like he's 12.
Yeah, exactly. I was 19, but I looked like I was about 11 years old.
Well, fortunately, Steve Kern didn't spend enough time in the territory to break you in. But anyway, so you've got such great projects going on right now. And for folks who don't know of your pedigree, you actually have had success in the real world, but for a time you were a vicious heel manager in Memphis in the 90s. And now with the Kentucky Fried Wrestling website and podcast, you're kind of recreating some of the old days, even before you, back in the real old days of like mine.
Yeah.
Some of the old days of Memphis wrestling, including some great cassette tapes, which we're going to talk more about today. But tell everybody why you got started doing what you're doing and trying to preserve this history, because there's so many of us. It seems like Memphis has a historian in every corner.
Well, basically, my father was a wrestling fan in 74 and 75, and I couldn't care less. You know, I've said it before that I wanted to watch Foghorn Leghorn, but I had to settle for Lance Russell, which I guess in a way they're
kind of the same thing.
They're kind of the same thing. But the thing that really caught my attention, one day I looked up and I saw Archie Goldie, the Mongolian Stomper. And it was a clip from the Mid-South Coliseum, you know, about 8,000, 9,000 people, because the Stomper was such a huge draw. And this must have been, I guess, the summer of 75 when he was just red hot with Bearcat Wright. And, you know, as often would happen in Memphis, there was a post-match melee, and all the wrestlers are coming in from the back. And the Stomper is just tossing these guys around like sacks of garbage. And I was a huge Marvel Comics fan. And I was a big fan of the Incredible Hulk and Spider-Man. And I was like, God, this guy is the Incredible Hulk. And so I slowly started paying attention then. And then along comes Jerry Lawler, the White Knight. You know, he returns after being banished from Memphis wrestling. He had already made his babyface turn at the conclusion of the Quest for the Title program in 74. And then he and Jerry Jarrett had a little bit of a disagreement over whether or not he should make towns in Knoxville. So he was gone for a while. And then comes back. And from then on, I started becoming a bit of a super fan. And then when the summer of 77 hit and that Lawler and Dundee feud took off, man, I was hooked from that moment. And probably,
you know, when you think about it, with Bill Dundee, a lot of people, and even the early version of the Smart fans in the late 70s and early 80s that were tape trading and everything, they go, Bill Dundee's in the main event. What the fuck? Well, this wouldn't fly. Dundee and Lawler, over a longer period of time, drew more people, more money for their program than Lawler's programs with the world champions, with Terry Funk, with every big Austin Idol. I mean, every big name in wrestling, because they fit perfectly. And also Dundee got the chance to come in, and Jerry Jarrett liked his work and his work ethic. I don't know that anybody else would have given him the chance to get over in that way because of his size at that time. But since Jarrett did, he did get over, and he got over so good. 40 years later, he's still over.
Well, yeah, and from the moment they started, because the Australians, as they were called, came in right after Lawler left. I mean, I think it was I think Lawler's last match in Memphis was in February of 75 against Jack Briscoe, who, I don't know if you're aware of this, Jack Briscoe and Jerry Briscoe were the ones who allegedly had put the bounty on the head of the king, which I thought was kind of funny because Jack said in an interview once that, before I retired, I really wanted to do a heel program, with Jerry as my partner. And that's why they did that deal in Mid-Atlantic.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know if he was aware of it, but they were already heels in Memphis.
Yeah. Oh, no. They never bothered to tell the Briscoes. They just,
no.
But yeah, as a matter of fact, and I think Lawler's last appearance in Louisville was the first week of January. And even here's the thing. I'd seen Lawler versus every top star. He was a Southern champion. Fargo had passed the torch. He'd had the match with Briscoe. He's in main events all over the place. And all of a sudden, it was like the first week of January of 75 at the Gardens was a tag team tournament. He was partners with Jerry Bryant. And if memory serves, and I wrote the book, but I don't have it in front of me, they got beat in the first round match by like Phil Higgerson and Doug Patton. And I've got a picture of Lawler walking out of the ring with just that, what I've now come to know is that kind of slump-shouldered stature he gets when it's like, oh, well, can't grieve forever. He's jobbed out and walking out of the ring. And that was the last time we got Lawler until that fall. So immediately I knew something was up there. I started kind of getting smart about booking in some respect, but the next week or two, here comes Barnes and Dundee, and my God, against Eddie Marlin and Tojo Yamamoto, two guys who were not noted for high spot wrestling. Those were the most exciting matches I'd ever seen in my life. The bumps they took and the heat they got, and they were flying everywhere. It was goddamn insane.
Well, and the pace that they kept.
Yeah.
I mean, gosh, I put a match up on my YouTube channel with, I believe it was right after Dundee turned babyface, and I believe he's in there with Eddie Marlin against the interns. And man, the pace was just unbelievable. And they had this really kind of complicated finish, and it was executed beautifully. And I don't think any of those guys were 6 foot tall. But in Memphis, it didn't matter, as long as the action was hot, the promos were good.
Besides, if everybody's the same size, you can't tell whether they're down or not. But, the thing that stuck with me about Barnes and Dundee, and the Midnight Express used this, and it was an old heel tactic, but it was the first time, because I hadn't been watching wrestling that long, and I'd only been going to the matches live 6 months or whatever. But Dennis Convery used to like to do it, where the heels would be in the ring first, and they'd be fucking yelling at the crowd and, getting people, stirred up. And then the baby faces they had wronged would hit hot and fucking attack them, was still wearing the belts, still with their fucking jackets on. In the Midnight's case, it was robes. Matter of fact, one night in Houston, Wrestling 2 shot Dennis off in his robe and gave him a big gut shot that he used to do to set up for the knee lift, but he didn't realize Dennis was still wearing the belt. And he fucking punched the belt and almost broke his fucking hand. But so Barnes and Dundee would have the jackets, or the Dundee had the tux with tails thing. They would jump them, the belts would fly, and they'd shoot them off in opposite directions. And they would take 2 different kind of bumps over the top rope, but at the buckle, not just over the rope, but at the buckle. And they wouldn't stop fucking falling until they landed in down the aisle in the 3rd row. And it was just fucking crazy.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think the timing of it was perfect for Dundee and Barnes to come in and kind of get over as the new heel stars, especially with Lawler out of the territory. And Dundee and Barnes, man, good gosh, we played it. I believe it was Dundee's either first or second interview in the studio. And Jarrett told them, go in there and act like you're better than everybody else. Well, they almost took it a step too far with some of the racial terms that they were using. I'm surprised that they didn't start a riot, but man, they had heat from the word go. And I think, by the time Lawler returned and, Dundee had already gotten over as such a big star. Yeah, I mean, it just set it up because there was legit heat between those two. Like Dundee had, he'd been the one kind of carrying things while Lawler was gone. Lawler comes back. And so there's this natural heat. That's
I think, and they said, Lawler and Dundee both said they always respected each other, but they didn't. And they do it on promos too, on TV, the same thing that they pretty much would have said if you asked them at the, parking lot of the gas station. well, we're just not the two same type of people. We don't like to hang out together and go to dinner or whatever, whatever Dundee would say in those promos when they would team up finally, they'd both be baby faces.
You sounded a little more Irish there, Jim.
Well, I can't do the fucking accents. All right. But, but basically they would each, even as baby faces, admit to people, yeah, we don't travel with each other. We don't hang out and, et cetera. I'm doing it again, but we can fight. And so people knew even when they were baby faces, there was tension there because, and I remember Lawler would say things to the fans at the matches or after when they'd stop, and Lawler'd go to McDonald's, Dundee'd go to the liquor store to get beer, right? Same stop. Mm-hmm. And Lawler'd be saying, yeah, look at Dundee. I bet he's going to stare in the rearview mirror all the way home. And Dundee'd go, look at Lawler. I bet he's going to play his cassette of his album all the way home.
Well, I love that promo that Lawler cuts because he would say, Dundee came out here and said that, he would drive me to the matches and I'd sleep in the back. Yeah, he would tell me, get in the back, King, take a nap. And then he'd raise the seat up as far as it could go, get a couple of phone books, and he'd try to act like that was his Cadillac he was driving around.
Well, you can't do him any better than I can. You can't do Lawler any better than I can do Dundee. But anyway, and this is the kind of flavor, by the way, folks, that you can hear on the Kentucky Fried Wrestling podcast because you've started doing this. How long ago did you start the website, though? Because you've had the website and you've written a ton of great articles on classic Memphis moments.
Well, the website started just completely by accident. I was writing for Kevin Smith's website. The movie director, Miramax, had given him a budget to do whatever.
You actually know normal people. You wouldn't normally think would deal with a fucking shyster like you.
Exactly. Well, out here in Hollywood, I don't know if there are too many normal people, but anyway, they asked me to write a column about Jerry Jarrett's reentry into the profession with TNA, and I titled the name of that story Kentucky Fried Wrestling because it was, kind of a Southern approach back on a somewhat national scene on pay-per-view. And then a few days later, Curt Hennig died. And they asked me if I would write another piece. And I said, sure. And suddenly I had a masthead and I was listed among the regular contributors, Kentucky Fried Wrestling by Scott Bowden. This week features Curt Hennig. And I'm like, wait a minute. So suddenly I got suckered into writing this weekly column, but it was great, and it was something that I had always wanted to do, but I never really had the right form for it, and I was always working 2 or 3 jobs in advertising and marketing and PR, but this was too good to pass up, to get the exposure on Kevin Smith's website, because they had so many different areas covered. It was comics, it was movies, it was the ultimate pop culture fans website. And so I did that for a few years, and before I knew it, it was something of a hit, and I started my own website, and then basically just started.
And that is get your plug in, boy. You used to manage that is Kentucky Fried Wrestling, right?
Well,
which is it?
It's KentuckyFriedWrestling.com, or if you're a little more sophisticated, I also have it as Kentucky Fried Wrestling.
So you can to avoid mistakes, you can go to both places. Either way, they can get there. Okay. Because I've seen some of your columns. I love the one on the night that they shaved Lawler's head, the cage match, and everything. You kind of recapped that angle at one point.
Mm-hmm.
But so now the podcast, because they couldn't get enough of you on the written page. So now you're doing the podcast, but you've got help with the form of you're using audio visual aids. You've got some old cassettes, and of course there's still some film that exists thanks to me and various sundry other fanatics. And you're kind of putting some of that together and reliving the moments that people kind of thought were lost. We can recreate them to some extent.
Yeah, it's really exciting. It's almost like Christmas morning, or maybe even Saturday morning at 11 a.m. Central when I was a kid, going through these boxes and finding these tapes, and they're not really marked. It'll just say Lawler promos, Dick the Bruiser, Bobo Brazil, and I pop them in, and I never know what I'm going to find on there. And and man, when I found that betrayal of Jerry Lawler at the hands of Sam Bass, Al Green, and Phil Hickerson, I went absolutely crazy because as far as I know, there's no footage of it, and it was the first time I'd ever heard the audio, and it was amazing. And I love it. Sam tosses Lawler's crown into the ring, and Al Green stomps on it, and you can hear Al, "Who's the king? Who's the king?" And oh man, it was just such intense heat, and it goes on for. And again, this is one of those little Jerry Jarrett details. Of course, no babyface is going to go out there.
It went on forever because he had nobody to save him because the heels beat him up and the babyfaces hate him.
Yeah, but finally Tojo comes out, and it was more to do with the fact that Tojo had an issue with Hickerson and Green and Bass than it had to do with saving Lawler. And Lance Russell, even Lance, Lance is usually like, "Can we get some help out here?" And he's really pounding the bell. Well, Lance has been the subject of Lawler's abuse for years. And so Lance kind of half-heartedly dings the bell.
Yeah.
And kind of mutters, can we get some help out here?
It's just so distasteful the way they're all acting. And and that Lance could add to something like that. I remember seeing when Tojo turned on Jerry Jarrett in spring of 1974 and started slapping him in the face with Jarrett crying and begging him to not do it because he was his mentor, and the disgust in Lance's voice is what got the whole thing over. Of course, nobody wanted to boo Tojo, and they switched him back not long after. That was supposed to be a big, strong angle, but they didn't want to boo Tojo. But Lance helped in aspects like that, and Lawler had done the Steve Austin thing that year where he got so much heat as a heel, but he was a hometown Memphis boy, and Memphis liked their own. They had pride in their own because of the Blue Stars and Elvis and Jerry Lee Lewis and whatever, and they'd never had a hometown pro wrestler that they thought was going to be the world champion, and all of a sudden, Lawler's it, and he can talk.
Mm-hmm.
So even without switching babyface, he had become the guy they cheered for to win the title, even though he was beating babyfaces mostly to do it. But at that point, it almost seemed to me like that all of a sudden Lawler was a babyface, but now they didn't really know what to do, and then it got cut off when he got sent away.
Yeah,
but I thought for that first six weeks or so, from the time it happened till the time he was gone, it's like, it wasn't like his babyface runs after that, where it looked like, okay, instantly we're going to make this guy the guy, and we have opponents lined up for him. He had to be a babyface against his former manager and the tag team that the manager also managed. And he had been in a singles program all year. It just didn't work for me, dog. You know?
Yeah. And I don't know if they had kept him in singles, if that would have been the way to go, or if he had made the save, and if he had to change of heart, and he had responded to the fans' fears finally. But in another way, I think Jarrett's thinking, and we had Jerry Jarrett on our first show, and he said, everything that we saw was by design. And I don't think Jerry Jarrett gets credit for being so detail oriented. He stuck Lawler with Bass and White to develop him.
Yeah.
And then he starts doing the quest for the title, and that was designed to slowly get him over as a babyface. And he said, every week it seemed like fans were getting a little bit more behind him. It was just a beautiful program. I think Lawler reached out to Bill Apter and told him what was going on, so you would see Lawler, climbing the rankings in the magazine.
Yeah.
And it had just this realism to it. But the thing that happened, and I'm not sure.
And that's why, 1974, as I've mentioned many times, they sold 400,000 tickets to the shows that year in Memphis. And it was huge for any market, but especially for a market that size. And I think it's almost that the business was so strong, it had to go down. And I think, once again, we'll never know what they were going to do because, like you said, Lawler got kind of banished there for getting a little big for his king britches, a little too big for his crown. But there wasn't really, when you think about it, unless it would have been Ron Fuller, there wasn't a strong heel lined up to work with Lawler. But Ron came in and took the top heel spot. But that was they kind of passed in the night. They never really worked anything with each other. So I guess the point is it seemed like a letdown. But when Barnes and Dundee came in, they pretty much carried until June the territory because they had so much heat. And they drew. Look back, and normally without Lawler, Memphis business specifically and the territory in general would be down. But they kept everything up till about June. And then once Barnes went back home and Dundee was kind of floundering as a heel for a couple months, that was a rough summer that year in the other towns in the territory. I remember Louisville was, had a few big gates, but it was a little rough on the cards until finally they got Dundee switched babyface and Lawler brought back. Yeah.
And I think some of it too was that Lawler had always sort of been himself, even as a heel. It was, if I have lunch with Jerry, he's joking around. He's being a smart aleck. He insults me a couple of times.
Yeah.
And we go back and forth, and he just kind of turns the volume up when he's out on TV. And I think when he switched babyface, he wasn't quite sure how to do it. Part of him was
he had never been a babyface before to any extent, just his first few matches.
Yeah. So he was still like Tojo was doing a promo, and Tojo was running a little long, and finally Lawler stops him and goes, "Tojo, I just got to stop you. When I'm in a tag team, I'm used to being the mouthpiece. So if you don't mind, just shut up."
As a matter of fact, we have, Brian, do we not have queued up some rare audio that Scott has salvaged from shortly after the Lawler turn, when he was still trying to find his form as a fired up babyface and went a little too far into American Dream territory?
Well, yeah, we do. And, the interesting thing is 74, of course, is the year of the big Dusty Rhodes babyface turn in Florida. So that was a big moment in wrestling history, and maybe something that was noticed by Jerry Lawler, because this is during that short run where Lawler is a babyface.
Yeah, well, it was noticed by everybody in the business. And remember, Jerry Jarrett was close friends with Jim Barnett and was also close with Eddie Graham at one time. And obviously, the business that Dusty was doing was on everybody's mind in the Southeast, at least. So I'm sure that there was probably some unintentional cribbage here.
Yeah. It was almost like Lawler wasn't sure what direction to take it. Like if he should still kind of be the cocky smart aleck king, which I think is what got him over later as a babyface, because he was still pretty much being himself. Yeah. But he also played around with channeling his inner Dusty and trying to have this deal with the people. And as you can see, I believe he tries to interact with this one woman, and it doesn't quite work out quite the way he planned on live television. But
so this is from what, December 74?
Yeah, this
November, I think.
November 74. Yeah. We'll play the clip, Brian, and then we'll listen to it and we'll come back.
With, I guess we have to call him guest commentator. He came in and decided to be our guest.
I've got a suggestion, Lance, if you don't mind. I think the most generous thing we could do for that Mr. X, we don't have too much time left. Rather than have him back out here and have Tojo beat his brains out again and humiliate him on his TV, how about if I go here and talk a little bit to my people? We've only got a minute in. Can I do that?
Yeah, you could do that.
There's a microphone over here. Wait a minute.
Yeah. Jerry Lawler heading over by the crowd.
Now, fine?
Just right on.
All righty. I love this sign and autograph bit, Lance. It's great, man. Now tell the truth. Who is the greatest wrestler you've ever seen? All right. Let me get back in here. Hey, how you doing?
Get over here where I can hear what he says. I don't want to apologize.
Hello there. Here she is. Get the camera on her. This is my #1 fan right here. Can you see her? Now tell the truth. You didn't used to like me, did you?
No, I did.
But now do you love me?
No, honey.
I know what it is. Your boyfriend's out there watching. You don't want to make her jealous. That's it. Her boyfriend's watching. She don't want to make her jealous, man. Oh, by the way, I want to mention, listen, Lance, I love this talking to these people. After a while, at 3 o'clock, I'm going to be over at Pop Tunes on Summer Avenue. So if all you people come out there, say hello to everybody and give away some pictures and things like that. Will that be okay, Lance?
Okay, yeah. I don't know whether we can let you say that or not, but pardon me.
Oh, well, I just said it, so if you can't, we're in a lot of trouble.
All right, we'll scroll back down here. I don't exactly know what happens when Jerry Bad News Lawler is around, but all of a sudden we seem to lose control of the show. It happens every week, yeah.
Have you noticed, Lance? Have you noticed? We got a thing going here in Memphis now. Now, these are my people now, and they're going to get behind me and support me. And Al Green and Phil Hitcherson, man, they're going to come out there Monday night. And when the king hits the ring, it's going to be 10,000 of my people out there, Green and Hickerson. I want you to realize that, baby. And you just look around that Coliseum, you're going to see all my people, and you're going to know that not only are they hoping that you get your brains out, but the king and Tojo Yamamoto is going to be there to do the job on you, baby. Monday night. There he is.
Jim, how many times did you hear Jerry Lawler say the word baby? The entire time you were around him.
Actually, he did that. That was for a couple of years in the mid-'70s, even in his heel promos. He'd say, so let me tell you something, baby. I'm going to come down because it was a thing to do. You were cool in the 70s when you said, let me tell you something, baby. But yeah, he was being overly pandering to the people there more than the king would later when he was a babyface, because he hadn't lost the accent quite yet, like he would a little bit later on, except when, sometimes he'd let his guard down. And he learned a little bit later on, to put a little bit more bass in his voice and put a little bit more feeling in it. And he had more modulation. It would, he'd get louder and softer. He'd have more inflection. And it just came along. But even then, that guy that was there had just come off being a run as one of the top 10 box office attractions in the business nationwide in 1974, but was still, he had just turned he just turned 25, and he was 4 years from his first match, and probably 2.5 years from being put in a top spot down in Montgomery, Alabama, which was the smallest place at the time in the country you could go to and still do TV and have a territory. So he was still really inexperienced, and like we said, that was the first time that he had actually become a pushed babyface that was expected to talk, and he probably was still trying to figure out exactly how he should go about it.
Yeah, and it's funny because 3 weeks ago he was supposedly like one of the most hated men in Memphis, and now he's signing autographs at Pop Tunes.
And by the way, that's where I used to go every Monday before the matches. I'd get in town early, and I'd go to Pop Tunes on Summer Avenue and get the 45s for $1 a piece. But anyway, and that's something else about the Memphis TV show, and it was so special. Even when the hour show would play in a week delay in Louisville, or Evansville, Lexington, wherever, the Memphis show had all that local content because it was an hour and a half, and they had 30 minutes minus the commercial, so 25 minutes or so that they could specifically talk to people in Memphis and do promos for the matches in Memphis and show footage of what happened the previous week in Memphis. And it really was a local television show. And when you got the stars of the TV show wading out in the audience, even if sometimes they don't give you the answer that you're looking for, that's why that show was such an institution. They had people lined up for 9 months waiting to get tickets to get in the studio.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I think I attended the studio matches only once because, I mean, just the thought of having to wait 2 months, 3 months for tickets was just overwhelming.
And the process was they would give the address, you write into the TV station, and the tickets were free, but they would send them to you in the mail. And basically, they got so backed up with requests that they were sending tickets out for, okay, here's your date 6 months from now. And then the reason why a lot of the little black kids would always get in the studio every week is because if you wrote in for tickets in February and they sent you tickets for a taping in August, if you were on vacation and didn't show up, they didn't send out makeup tickets, so they'd let all the little kids in to fill up the seat.
Yeah.
So whoever lived in the neighborhood that just wanted to go out there and stand would sometimes be rewarded.
Yeah, from what I understand, there was also there were two lines. There were lines with people with tickets waiting to get in, and then there were like the hangarounds.
Yeah,
who were just hoping to get a spot. And then they would have cheerleading squads there. They would have the Boy Scout troops. I mean, it was just incredible. And pretty much everybody, we talked about the TV ratings, but everybody I knew either watched the show or at least had it on in the background. It was such a Memphis institution that I think was on
Lance was always proud of the one statistic part, apart from the ratings and everything. Lance was always proud of was the turn-on factor. There were more TV sets in the city of Memphis turned on at 11 a.m. on Saturday than like any other day or time in of the week. And that was because of that show. And well, you went to school there. I've told stories because I've talked to people and heard them, but it would be like to the point where when the teachers were breaking up fights in grade school, they'd be like, hey, come on now, this isn't Monday night. I mean, everybody equated fighting and wrestling with Monday nights and Jerry Lawler and Lance Russell.
So many times my mother would come and my friends and I were, roughhousing in the backyard. She'd be like, hey, this ain't Monday night wrestling. Yeah. I mean, you heard that everywhere. You heard it at home, at schools. If any kids were ever getting out of hand, it was always a reference to Monday Night Wrestling.
That had to be so cool because we all got beat up at various points to be wrestling fans, figuratively, if not literally. But people would knock wrestling back in the day and et cetera. Oh, it's all fake. And of course, you'd try to defend it. But to have that was probably the town in America where you were more likely to find somebody that was into wrestling, even if they weren't into the facts and figures and the business end and they weren't the super fans. They just liked to watch wrestling. You could probably find somebody in Memphis easier than any other city in the country at that point in time that would like to sit down and watch wrestling.
Well, even in the 90s, Jim, when I finally got into it and the popularity had dropped and, sometimes it was a little sad to go out there and work in front of 1,200 people in the, 11,500 seat Coliseum. Everyone still watched that show. I was in college when I was a heel manager, and I had everyone from my English professor to the janitor at the journalism building. They would all say, hey, I know you. You're on wrestling, right? And I'm like, yeah. No. Well, because I don't watch it, but I was flipping the channels the other day.
Yeah. Or I was walking through the room when the kids had it on. Yes. Lawler. I took Lawler. Well, I didn't take him. He took me, but went to the airport. The day I followed him around, you've seen a lot of pictures in the magazines of it was before his match with Hulk Hogan. And one of the things we did was go to the airport so he could have a picture taken at the cockpit of a 747. He just walked up to the Northwest counter and said, hey, can I get on a plane? Oh, it's Lawler. Okay. But while we were in the airport, some guy, I'll never forget this. He walked up and proceeded to tell Lawler everything he'd done in his career for like the previous 10 years, right? And then say, well, I don't watch the show, but the kids watch it, and I walk through, see it on. And when he left, Lawler turned to me and said, that guy must walk through his fucking living room a lot.
Yeah.
But that's even in the 2000s when Corey Macklin was doing the local show and there was the Resurrections. It was still Memphis Wrestling was doing an 8 rating then for a low budget show with mostly reruns of matches that were taped 20 years before. We'd still do an 8 rating that modern day current promotions would kill for in any other market. And it was always the highest rating or highest rated market for Raw and SmackDown, or for, any of the national shows. It was just, they probably put the boots to it at some point, between then and now, to where, but still Lawler just debuted his classic Memphis wrestling show where he's going to show the same shit they showed 35 years ago. And it'll get a bigger rating than the modern promotions that do in their markets. It'll
never end.
Hey, and some people are saying that about this podcast. That may be a graceful exit. No, I've had fun, and I wanted to announce, and we're going to talk more about it. But would you like to come back next week and do some more of this?
Yeah, absolutely. And hey, you got to be a guest on my show now.
Well, that's what we're about to talk about, and we'll talk more about it next week here on the program. Is that you've not only discovered this archive of classic cassette tapes, but we've made some arrangements. We've got to get our people together. Your people have to talk to my people, but I've got a ton of old 70s classic Memphis wrestling, including some from the Memphis show from the 70s on cassette tape, and have never had time to fully exploit that material. But now that you apparently are independently wealthy and have nothing to do but listen to cassette tape, you're going to get some of mine too. And in the months and years probably to come, the way this project's going to take, we have a good shot. Mark James, of course, my co-author in some of my publications, has done a great job with the newspaper articles and ads and the programs and etc. We've got some tape that we can recreate. We're going to recreate some 70s Memphis wrestling, because for the people who haven't seen it, it's new to you. And I guarantee it'll be more fun to watch and listen to than the shit they're feeding you today. So, Scott, you can come back next week, and we will talk more about this and other projects and great Memphis matches. It keeps me in a good mood. And, Brian, you and I have done all our business and told the people about how that they should hop on this incredible, crazy, insane, wild, wacky, wonderful $10 DVD classic wrestling bonanza sale. And we've told the folks about the Arcadian Vanguard Network. I think this is a good time to get out of Dodge and make like cow shit and hit the trail, don't you?
Sure.
Well, in that case, for another episode of the Jim Cornette Experience, until next week, when Bowden will come back unless he's in jail, and we'll have more on stupid people that piss me off. For Brian Last and the incredible Scott Bowden, I'm Jim Cornette. Thank you. Fuck you. Bye.